I was halfway through drilling my ice fishing hole when I heard the sharp clack of expensive boots on frozen lake ice, followed by a voice that could shatter glass at 20 paces. "Excuse me, sir. You cannot have that structure here." I looked up from my work to see a woman in her mid-40s marching across the ice toward my shanty, waving what appeared to be a thick binder above her head like it was some kind of holy scripture. She wore a puffy white jacket that probably cost more than my fishing gear, designer jeans tucked into those ridiculous fur-lined boots, and oversized sunglasses despite the overcast Minnesota sky. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful. I straightened up, wiping ice shavings off my gloves. "Can I help you?" "I'm Patricia Vandermeer, president of the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association," she announced, stopping about 10 feet from my shanty. Her breath came out in angry little puffs of condensation. "And I'm here to inform you that this—" She gestured dramatically at my modest ice fishing shanty. "This eyesore is in direct violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our HOA bylaws regarding temporary structures on community property." I blinked at her, processing this bizarre intrusion. "Community property?" "Yes, community property." She opened her binder, the pages flapping in the cold wind coming across the lake. "The lake visible from our community is considered a shared aesthetic resource, and any structures placed upon it require HOA approval, which you most certainly do not have. I'm going to have to ask you to remove this immediately." I looked at my shanty, then back at Patricia. It was a simple wooden structure, maybe 8 by 10 feet, painted a nice forest green. I'd built it myself 3 years ago, and it had weathered countless fishing seasons. "Madam, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," she snapped, "is yours. When you purchased property in Lakeside Estates, you agreed to abide by all HOA regulations. This includes maintaining the aesthetic integrity of our community viewshed." "I didn't purchase property in Lakeside Estates," I said calmly. Patricia's perfectly shaped eyebrows shot up above her sunglasses. "Excuse me, my name is Connor Lancaster. I own the property on the west side of the lake, the old Lancaster family estate, been in my family since 1947. She waved her hand dismissively. "That's irrelevant. The lake itself falls under community oversight as per our Environmental Conservation Clause." I couldn't help the slight smile that crossed my face. "Patricia, was it?" "Mrs. Vandermeer," she corrected sharply. "Mrs. Vandermeer, I don't think you understand. This isn't just any part of the lake. This is the Western Basin. The property line extends to the lake bed, has since my grandfather bought it. I own this section of the lake. The water, the ice, the bed beneath it. All of it." Her face went through several interesting color changes, from pale to pink to an angry red. "That's impossible. Lakes are public property in Minnesota. Most of them, yes. But not private lakes, and not sections of lakes that were specifically deeded as part of larger estate properties before certain regulations went into effect. My family has the original deed, property surveys, and about 78 years of tax records proving we own this entire section of Lake Minnewaska." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Finally, she said, "I'm going to need to see proof of that." "Happy to provide it," I said. "But first, I've got a question for you. How did you even get out here? This is a 1/4 mile from the Lakeside Estates shoreline across private property." "I walked," she said as if it were obvious, "across the lake." "Across my lake," I corrected. "You're currently standing on my property demanding I remove my structure from my property." She pulled her phone from her pocket. "We'll see about that. I'm calling our HOA attorney right now." "You do that," I said, turning back to my ice fishing setup. "But while you're at it, You might want to ask him about trespassing laws." I could hear her behind me, speaking in urgent, hushed tones to whoever she'd called. I ignored her and got back to work, setting up my tip-ups and checking my gear. The fish weren't going to catch themselves, and I'd been planning this outing for weeks. After about 10 minutes of heated phone conversation, Patricia stormed back over. "My attorney says that lakefront property rights are extremely complex in Minnesota, and that he'll need to review your supposed documentation. In the meantime, I'm formally requesting that you voluntarily remove this structure to avoid potential legal action." "Request noted and denied," I said cheerfully, dropping my line through the hole. "Now, if you don't mind, I'm trying to fish." "This isn't over," she hissed. "The HOA has dealt with difficult residents before, and we always win. Always." "I'm not a resident of your HOA," I called as she stalked away across the ice. "But good luck with that." I watched her retreat, shaking my head. In the 3 years since Lakeside Estates had been built on the eastern shore, I'd had minimal interaction with the development. They kept to their side. I kept to mine. My property was a sprawling 15 acres of forested land with about 800 feet of lake frontage. The house itself sat back from the water, a renovated 1940s cabin that my grandfather had built with his own hands. When developers had approached me 5 years ago about selling, I turned them down flat. The Lancaster property wasn't for sale. Instead, they'd bought the Hendricks farm on the eastern side and built their cookie-cutter McMansion development. 50 identical houses, each priced at $500,000 or more, all with perfect lawns and perfect landscaping and apparently a perfectly tyrannical HOA. That evening, as I cleaned my modest catch of perch and crappie, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Hello." "Mr. Lancaster. This is David Brennan from Brennan, Michaels and Associates. I represent the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association." "That was fast," I said, setting down my filleting knife. "Mrs. Vandermeer is quite insistent. She sent me photos of your ice fishing structure and claims it's negatively impacting property values for the Lakeside Estates community." "Mr. Brennan, did Mrs. Vandermeer happen to mention that she was standing on my private property when she took those photos?" There was a pause. "She indicated the structure was on the lake, which she understood to be public property." "Then she was mistaken. I own the western basin of Lake Minnewaska. The property line extends across the lake bed. I've got the surveys and the deed to prove it." "Mr. Lancaster, with all due respect, that's a fairly unusual claim. Most Minnesota lakes—" "I know what most Minnesota lakes are like," I interrupted. "But my family's property predates most of the public waterways legislation. We've been paying taxes on that lake bed for nearly 80 years. I'm happy to send you copies of the relevant documents, but I can tell you right now that your client has no legal standing here." Another pause. "I see. Would you be willing to send those documents to my office for review?" "Sure. Give me your email address." I spent the next hour scanning the old property documents my grandfather had left me. The original 1947 deed clearly showed the property line extending across the lake bed, encompassing roughly 40 acres of water. The subsequent surveys from 1952, 1967, 1989, and 2018 all confirmed the same boundaries. I sent everything to Brennan's office and went to bed, figuring that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I woke to find 3 official-looking letters taped to my front door. All from the Lakeside Estates HOA. The first was a formal complaint about my illegal structure. The second was a courtesy notice about HOA regulations regarding lake structures. The third was a bill for $500 in administrative processing fees for reviewing my supposed violation. I called Brennan's office immediately. "Did you get the documents I sent?" I asked when he picked up. "I did, Mr. Lancaster. And I've advised Mrs. Vandermeer that her complaint has no legal merit. You clearly own the property in question." "Then why did I just receive 3 letters from the HOA, including a bill for $500? Brennan sighed. It was a long, tired sigh that suggested he dealt with this kind of thing regularly. Mrs. Vandermeer can be persistent. I've told her in no uncertain terms that the HOA has no authority over your property. What she does with that information is beyond my control. So she's just ignoring legal advice. That would be an accurate assessment, yes. Great, I muttered. Just great. I threw the letters in the trash and tried to forget about it. But Patricia Vandermeer wasn't the forgetting type. Over the next week, I received daily letters. Complaints about the shanty's color. Complaints about the size. Complaints about the environmental impact of ice fishing. One particularly creative letter claimed that my shanty was blocking the migration patterns of waterfowl, despite the fact that it was January and most waterfowl had migrated months ago. I ignored them all, but the harassment escalated. One morning I drove out to the lake to find an official-looking sign planted in the ice next to my shanty. Notice: structure in violation of local ordinances. Removal required by 2/1/2026. The sign wasn't from any government agency. It was printed on the Lakeside Estates HOA letterhead. I pulled out my phone and took several photos, then removed the sign and brought it back to my house. This was getting out of hand. That afternoon, I called the Wright County Sheriff's Office and asked to speak with someone about harassment and trespassing. Deputy Marshal Torres returned my call within an hour. "Mr. Lancaster, I understand you're having some issues with your neighbors." I explained the situation, from Patricia's initial confrontation to the fake official notices. Torres listened quietly, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Do you have documentation proving your property ownership?" he asked. "Extensive documentation. Deeds, surveys, tax records going back to 1947. And you've told Mrs. Vandermeer that she's on your property when she does these things, multiple times. Okay, here's what I recommend. Send a formal cease and desist letter, preferably through an attorney. Document every instance of trespassing with photos and dates. If she continues after receiving the letter, we can pursue harassment charges." "I was hoping it wouldn't come to that," I said. "I understand. But people like this usually don't stop until there are real consequences. An HOA president who thinks she can bully people into compliance isn't going to back down just because you ask nicely." He was right, of course. I called a local attorney, Jennifer Harding, whom my grandfather had used for property matters. She agreed to send a cease and desist letter on my behalf. The letter went out on a Friday via certified mail. By Monday morning, Patricia was at my door. I opened it to find her standing on my porch, the cease and desist letter crumpled in her fist. Her face was scarlet, and her eyes blazed with fury. "How dare you threaten me with legal action?" she shouted before I could even say hello. "Good morning, Mrs. Vandermeer," I said calmly. "I didn't threaten you. I informed you through my attorney that your continued harassment and trespassing on my property needs to stop." "Harassment? Harassment? I'm trying to maintain community standards. Do you have any idea what that shanty is doing to our property values?" "I genuinely don't care," I said. "It's my property. You have no say in what I do with it. The HOA has covenants that protect the aesthetic quality of the entire lakefront area. Your HOA covenants apply to your HOA members. I'm not a member of your HOA. I never signed any agreements with your HOA. Your rules don't apply to me." Patricia's voice rose to a near shriek. "This is unacceptable. The homeowners paid a premium for lakefront views, and your ugly little shack is ruining them. Then maybe you should have checked property boundaries before you bought houses, I said. Now, I'm going to ask you once to leave my property. If you don't, I'm calling the sheriff. You can't intimidate me, she spat. The HOA has resources, we have attorneys, we have political connections. We will make your life miserable until you comply. Mrs. Vandermeer, leave. Now. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and stormed off, muttering threats under her breath. I watched her get into her white Mercedes SUV and peel out of my driveway, leaving ruts in the gravel. I immediately called Deputy Torres and reported the incident. He took my statement and added it to the growing file on Patricia Vandermeer. But Patricia was just getting started. The next day, I received a notice that the HOA had filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board, claiming my shanty was an unpermitted structure. The day after that, someone called the Minnesota DNR and reported that I was operating an illegal fishing operation on public waters. Both agencies had to send inspectors. Both confirmed that I was completely within my rights, and both were apologetic about wasting my time. We get complaints from HOAs all the time, the DNR inspector told me wearily. Usually, it's neighbors mad about somebody's boat dock or whatever. This lady called 3 times yesterday insisting we needed to shut you down immediately. The harassment continued for another 2 weeks. Patricia filed complaints with the county health department, claiming my shanty was a public health hazard. She filed complaints with the EPA, claiming I was polluting the lake. She even filed a complaint with the FAA, somehow arguing that my shanty was a navigational hazard for aircraft, despite being about 6 inches tall and on a frozen lake. Every complaint was investigated and dismissed. Every agency told Patricia the same thing. I was on my own property, breaking no laws, and she needed to leave me alone. Instead, she started showing up at the lake with other HOA members. They'd stand at the edge of their property, which ended at the shoreline, and take photos of my shanty with telephoto lenses. They'd shout complaints across the ice. One woman actually tried to lecture me about environmental stewardship while I was in the middle of landing a nice northern pike. "Do you have any idea how much damage ice fishing does to the ecosystem?" she yelled. "Madam, I practice catch and release. I pack out all my trash, and I've been fishing this lake for 30 years, I called back. "I probably know more about this lake's ecosystem than anyone in your development." "That's impossible. I have a degree in environmental science." "Then you should know that sustainable recreational fishing has minimal impact on healthy fish populations." She huffed and stormed away, but the incident was typical of what I was dealing with. The HOA had apparently made removing my shanty their primary mission. Patricia had even put it on the agenda for their monthly meetings, according to a neighbor of mine who had a friend in Lakeside Estates. "She's obsessed," my neighbor Tom told me over coffee one morning. "My buddy Jerry says the meetings are insane. She's got charts and graphs about how your shanty is destroying their property values. She's calculating the exact dollar amount of damage. Last count, she claimed your shanty has cost the community over $200,000 in lost equity." I nearly spit out my coffee. 200,000. It's an 8x10 shack that's visible from maybe 10 of their 50 houses, and only if you're specifically looking for it. "You're using logic," Tom said. "Patricia doesn't do logic, she does drama." He wasn't wrong. The situation reached a new level of absurdity when I went out to my shanty one February morning and found it surrounded by orange construction fencing. Not on my property, carefully positioned just at the property line, but creating a visual barrier that made it look like my shanty was some kind of hazardous site. I called Jennifer Harding again. "They're getting creative," she said when I described the fencing. "It's not technically on your property, so they can argue they have the right to put up whatever they want on their side. It's petty but probably legal." So what do I do? Honestly, ignore it, or better yet, embrace it. The more unreasonable they act, the better your case if this ever goes to court. You think it'll go to court? I think Patricia Vandermeer is the type who doesn't know when to quit. Eventually, she's going to cross a line she can't uncross. Jennifer was right, but the line Patricia crossed was worse than either of us anticipated. It was a Saturday morning in mid-February when I got a call from Tom. "Connor, you need to get down to the lake right now," he said urgently. "What's wrong? Just get down here. Now." I threw on my coat and boots and ran down to the shore. What I saw made my blood boil. My shanty was gone, not collapsed, not damaged. Gone. Where it had stood for 3 winters, there was now just a smooth expanse of ice and the scattered remains of my ice fishing holes. What the hell? I stared at the empty space, trying to process what I was seeing. "I saw them," Tom said. He was standing next to me, looking grim. "About 6 this morning. Patricia and 4 or 5 other people from the HOA. They had some kind of heavy equipment, a sled with a winch or something. They dismantled your shanty and hauled it away." "They what?" "I grabbed my phone and got video," Tom said, holding up his phone. "All of it. I figured you'd need evidence." I watched the video, my anger growing with each frame. There was Patricia, directing operations like a general commanding troops. There were the other HOA members, systematically taking apart my shanty, loading the pieces onto a large sled, and dragging it across the ice toward the lakeside estate's shore. "Where did they take it?" I asked. "Their community dumpster. I watched them throw every piece in there." I immediately called Deputy Torres. He arrived within 20 minutes, accompanied by another deputy. I showed them the video, explained the situation, and watched as Torres's jaw tightened. "That's theft, criminal trespassing, and possibly destruction of property," he said. "Depending on the value of the structure, it could be a felony." "I built it myself 3 years ago," I said. "Material costs were maybe $1,500, but the labor and the sentimental value." "It was my winter sanctuary." Torres nodded. "We're going to go have a conversation with Mrs. Vandermeer right now. I'll need you to come down to the station later to file a formal report." I watched the deputies drive away, then turned back to the empty ice. I was furious, but underneath the anger was something else. A cold determination. Patricia had been harassing me for weeks, but this was different. This was a crime, and she was going to face consequences for it. At the station that afternoon, I filed a detailed report. I provided copies of all the harassing letters, photos of the fake official notices, documentation of Patricia's trespassing, and Tom's video of the theft. The deputy taking my statement whistled low when he saw the pile of evidence. "She really went after you," he said. "She really did." "Well, the good news is you've got documentation of everything. The DA is going to have an easy time with this one." That evening, Deputy Torres called me. "Thought you'd want to know, we arrested Patricia Vandermeer about an hour ago. She's being charged with theft, criminal trespassing, and criminal damage to property." "How did she react?" "About how you'd expect. Lots of shouting about how she was protecting community interests, and you're the real criminal for not respecting HOA regulations." "She honestly seems to believe she did nothing wrong." "What happens now?" "She'll be arraigned, probably Monday. Given her lack of criminal history, she'll likely make bail. But this is serious enough that the DA is taking it personally. Apparently, he's dealt with overzealous HOA boards before, and he's not a fan." Over the weekend, the story spread through the area like wildfire. A local news station picked it up and ran a segment. HOA president arrested for destroying neighbor's property. The video of Patricia and her crew dismantling my shanty went viral on social media. Within 2 days, it had over 1 million views and thousands of comments, most expressing outrage at Patricia's behavior. The publicity did something I hadn't expected. It made other people come forward. A couple who had lived in Lakeside Estates for 2 years contacted me through the news station. They'd moved out after Patricia had fined them repeatedly for having the wrong shade of beige paint on their shutters and for planting flowers that weren't on the approved list. They'd spent thousands of dollars trying to comply with constantly changing regulations before finally selling at a loss and leaving. A man who'd been fined $200 for parking his work truck in his own driveway reached out. The HOA rules said only passenger vehicles were allowed in driveways, and his pickup truck with company logos was classified as commercial. A retired couple shared their story of being fined for hanging an American flag that was 2 inches larger than the regulation size specified in the HOA bylaws. The stories poured in, dozens of them, painting a picture of an HOA run by a tyrant who used rules and regulations to bully and control everyone around her. The Wright County Attorney, Michael Chen, contacted me personally. "Mr. Lancaster, I'd like to discuss your case. Would you have time to meet this week?" We met at his office on Wednesday. Chen was a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who got right to the point. "I've been going through your documentation," he said, "and I've also been hearing from other residents of Lakeside Estates. Mrs. Vandermeer has been running that HOA like her personal fiefdom, and what she did to you was just the most visible example of a pattern of abusive behavior." "So what happens now?" I asked. "We proceed with the criminal charges." Given the value of the structure, the deliberate nature of the act, and the documented pattern of harassment, I'm confident we can get a conviction. I'm offering her a plea deal, community service and restitution, but between you and me, I don't think she'll take it. She genuinely believes she was in the right. "She told me the HOA always wins," I said. "Then she's about to learn otherwise." Patricia rejected the plea deal, just as Chen predicted. She hired an expensive attorney from Minneapolis, some high-powered firm that specialized in property law. The attorney tried to argue that Patricia had a good faith belief she was enforcing legitimate community standards, and that the shanty was on disputed property. The judge wasn't buying it. "Counselor," Judge Sarah Morrison said dryly during a preliminary hearing, "your client was repeatedly informed by multiple parties, including her own attorney, that she had no legal standing. She was sent a cease and desist letter. She was shown property documents proving Mr. Lancaster's ownership. At what point does good faith belief become willful ignorance of the law?" Patricia's attorney had no good answer for that. The trial was set for April. In the meantime, I filed a civil suit against Patricia and the Lakeside Estates HOA for harassment, trespassing, theft, and emotional distress. Jennifer Harding was practically gleeful as she drew up the paperwork. "I've been practicing law for 23 years, she told me, "and I have never seen such a clear-cut case." She documented her own harassment with all those letters. She trespassed repeatedly and you warned her every time. She committed theft on video. This is a lawyer's dream. As winter turned to spring and the ice melted, I started rebuilding my shanty. This time, I built it even better. Insulated walls, a small wood stove, proper windows. If Patricia wanted to make an issue of my shanty, I'd give her a shanty worth looking at. The news coverage continued, and I became something of a local folk hero. People stopped me in the grocery store to shake my hand and tell me their own HOA horror stories. A local radio show invited me on to talk about property rights. Someone even started a GoFundMe to help with my legal expenses, though I declined the money and asked them to donate it to a legal aid charity instead. But the best thing that happened was at Lakeside Estates itself. The negative publicity had spooked the residents. Many of them hadn't realized how much power Patricia had been abusing. When the full extent of her behavior came to light, especially with all the former residents coming forward with their stories, the community revolted. A special meeting was called. Patricia was removed as HOA president by a vote of 42-3. The entire board was replaced, and the new board's first action was to hire an independent auditor to review the HOA's finances. That's when things got really interesting. The auditor found that over the past 4 years, Patricia had spent over $60,000 of HOA funds on personal expenses, dinners charged to the community relations budget, a new laptop and printer charged as administrative equipment that were found in her home office. She'd even billed the HOA for mileage driving to and from Minneapolis for shopping trips, claiming they were research for community aesthetic standards. The HOA filed their own criminal complaint against Patricia for embezzlement. By the time the trial rolled around in April, Patricia was facing criminal charges for theft, trespassing, property damage, and embezzlement. The prosecuting attorney presented a mountain of evidence: Tom's video of the shanty being dismantled, my documentation of the harassment, the testimony of the various agencies Patricia had filed false complaints with, the financial records showing the embezzlement. Patricia's defense was essentially that she'd been doing what was best for the community, and that everyone was overreacting. Her attorney tried to paint her as a dedicated volunteer who'd made some errors in judgment but meant well. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Judge Morrison sentenced Patricia to 18 months in county jail, 5 years probation, and ordered her to pay full restitution. That included the value of my shanty, damages to my property from the harassment, the cost of my legal fees, and the $60,000 she'd embezzled from the HOA. Mrs. Vandermeer, Judge Morrison said during sentencing, you were given a position of trust within your community, and you abused that trust repeatedly and egregiously. You used your position to bully, harass, and steal from your neighbors. You showed no remorse and no understanding that your actions were wrong. This court hopes that the sentence imposed today will give you time to reflect on your behavior and understand the harm you've caused. Patricia stood rigid, her face pale. She'd aged visibly over the past few months, the stress of the trial taking its toll. As the bailiff led her away, she cast one last venomous look in my direction. I met her gaze calmly. I felt no satisfaction in seeing her led away to jail, but I felt no sympathy either. She'd made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. The civil suit was settled out of court. The HOA's insurance paid a substantial sum, which I used to make improvements to my property, and to donate to several charities that helped people dealing with abusive HOAs. Patricia's personal assets were seized to pay her restitution, including her house in Lakeside Estates. As spring turned to summer, life returned to normal. The new HOA board at Lakeside Estates reached out with a formal apology and an invitation to attend one of their meetings. I accepted, curious to see how things had changed. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a nice building with large windows overlooking the lake. About 30 residents attended. The new president, a friendly man named Robert Chen, welcomed me warmly. Mr. Lancaster, on behalf of the entire Lakeside Estates community, I want to apologize for what you went through. Patricia Vandermeer's behavior was inexcusable, and we're working hard to make sure nothing like that ever happens again. I appreciate that, I said. We've completely rewritten our bylaws, Robert continued. We've eliminated the more ridiculous rules, implemented oversight on spending, and made it much easier to remove board members who abuse their positions. We're trying to be the kind of HOA that actually adds value to people's lives instead of making them miserable. That sounds like a good approach, I said. One of the residents raised her hand. Mr. Lancaster, I just want to say that I'm so sorry. I was one of the people who went along with Patricia's complaints about your shanty. I realize now how ridiculous it all was. Your shanty is charming, and you had every right to have it on your property. I hope you can forgive us for being so foolish. I looked around at the faces in the room. These weren't bad people. They'd just been caught up in Patricia's toxic leadership and had gone along without questioning it. There's nothing to forgive, I said. You trusted your HOA president to act in your best interests. That's reasonable. What happened wasn't your fault. After the meeting, several residents came up to talk to me. Some wanted to apologize personally. Others were curious about my property and the history of the lake. A few asked for fishing advice. By the end of the evening, I'd made several new friends. As summer progressed, I noticed a remarkable change in the Lakeside Estates community. The orange construction fencing came down. The residents started using the lake more, kayaking and paddleboarding, and even asking permission to fish from my shoreline, which I granted. The hostile, uptight atmosphere that had characterized the development under Patricia's rule evaporated, replaced by something that actually felt like a community. My new shanty was finished by August, ready for the next ice fishing season. I'd built it stronger and better than before, with a small deck and proper insulation. It was a thing of beauty, if I did say so myself. Tom stopped by one evening as I was putting the finishing touches on it. That's a hell of a shanty, he said admiringly. Thanks. Figured if I'm going to have the most controversial ice fishing shack in Minnesota, I might as well make it worth the fuss, he laughed. You hear Patricia got out last week, served 4 months, got out early for good behavior. Yeah, I heard. She moved to Duluth, apparently. Fresh start. Think she learned anything? I thought about that. I hope so, but honestly, some people never learn. They just find new situations where they can try to control everyone around them. Well, if she's in Duluth, she's not our problem anymore. That was true. Patricia Vandermeer had been a tornado that tore through our community for a few months, causing chaos and damage, but ultimately passing on. The scars she'd left were healing. The people she'd hurt were recovering. Life was going on. As autumn arrived and the leaves turned brilliant shades of red and gold, I spent my days on the lake, fishing and enjoying the peace. The Lakeside Estates residents would wave when they saw me. Sometimes they'd come over to chat. It was pleasant and neighborly, the way things should have been from the beginning. One October afternoon, Robert Chen called me. Connor, I wanted to give you a heads up. We're planning a community Halloween party and we'd love it if you'd come. Nothing fancy, just neighbors getting together. We're trying to build some actual community spirit around here. I'd like that, I said. Can I bring anything? Just yourself. And maybe some of those fishing stories I've heard you tell. The kids would love them. The Halloween party was held on a perfect October evening. Cool but not cold, with a full moon rising over the lake. Kids ran around in costumes while adults stood around a bonfire, drinking cider and talking. It was wholesome and warm, and I found myself genuinely enjoying the company of my Lakeside Estates neighbors. As I stood by the fire, watching kids bob for apples and parents laugh together, I reflected on the past year. It had been stressful and infuriating at times, dealing with Patricia's harassment and the legal battles that followed. But in a strange way, it had brought the community together. The people of Lakeside Estates had learned a hard lesson about the dangers of giving too much power to petty tyrants. They'd learned to question authority and stand up for what was right, and I'd learned something too. I'd learned that sometimes you have to fight for what's yours, not just the physical property but the principle of the thing. I'd learned that bullies only win when good people stay silent. And I'd learned that communities can heal and grow stronger after conflict, if people are willing to do the work. As winter approached and the ice began to form on the lake, I looked forward to many peaceful days in my new shanty, fishing and reading and enjoying the solitude. The property my grandfather had left me was more than just land and water. It was a legacy of independence and self-sufficiency, of standing firm against those who would try to push you around. I thought Grandpa would have been proud of how I'd handled Patricia Vandermeer. He dealt with his share of busybodies and petty officials over the years, always with a combination of politeness and absolute refusal to back down. He taught me that your property was your castle, and you had every right to defend it. The ice thickened, and by late November it was safe to drag my new shanty out to my favorite spot. I spent a Saturday getting everything set up perfectly. The little wood stove worked beautifully, keeping the interior cozy even when the wind howled outside. I'd installed a small bookshelf and brought out some of my favorite novels. This was going to be a good winter. On my first full day of fishing that season, I caught a beautiful northern pike, nearly 30 inches long. As I carefully released it back into the water through the ice hole, I heard footsteps outside. For a moment, my heart sank. Was this starting again? But when I opened the door, I found Robert Chen standing there with his young son, maybe 7 or 8 years old. "Hope we're not interrupting," Robert said. "Kyle here has been begging me to take him ice fishing, and I realized I have no idea what I'm doing. I thought maybe you could give us some pointers." I smiled, relieved. "Not interrupting at all. Come on in, I'll show you the basics." I spent the next 2 hours teaching Kyle how to bait a hook, how to read a tip-up, how to be patient and quiet and respectful of the fish and the lake. The kid was a natural, enthusiastic and careful at the same time. When he caught his first crappie, his face lit up with pure joy. "I caught it." "Dad, did you see? I caught it." "I saw, buddy. That's a beauty." As Robert and Kyle headed back across the ice that afternoon, the boy clutching his single fish with pride, I felt a sense of contentment I hadn't experienced in months. This was what it was all about. Sharing the lake, teaching the next generation, being part of a real community instead of a battleground. The rest of the winter passed peacefully. I fished, raided, and occasionally hosted visitors at the shanty. Word had spread about the famous ice fishing shack, and I had a steady stream of curious folks stopping by. Some were journalists wanting to do follow-up stories. Others were people dealing with their own HOA problems, looking for advice. I welcomed them all, shared my story, and offered what help I could. One visitor in particular stood out. A woman named Tracy Villanueva, probably in her early 30s, knocked on my shanty door on a gray February afternoon. "Mr. Lancaster, I'm Tracy. I drove up from Minneapolis. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I had to meet you." "Call me Connor," I said, inviting her in. "What brings you all the way up here?" "Your story," she said. "I'm dealing with something similar. My HOA is trying to make me remove a memorial garden I planted for my late husband. They say it violates the landscaping regulations. I've been fighting them for 6 months and I feel like I'm going crazy." We talked for over an hour. I shared my experience, the strategies that worked, the legal resources I'd used. I gave her Jennifer Harding's contact information and encouraged her to document everything. The most important thing, I told her, is don't let them make you feel like you're the unreasonable one. If you're in the right, stand your ground. Bullies back down when you refuse to be intimidated. Tracy left with tears in her eyes, thanking me profusely. 6 weeks later, she emailed to tell me that her HOA had backed down after she'd sent them a cease and desist letter. Her garden was safe. Stories like that made everything worthwhile. The stress, the legal battles, the anger and frustration, it had all led to something positive. People were standing up to abusive HOAs. Communities were reforming their governance. Change was happening. As spring returned and the ice melted once again, I pulled my shanty back to shore and began the annual ritual of preparing it for storage. As I worked, I thought about the year that had passed since Patricia Vandermeer had first stormed across the ice demanding I remove my structure. It had been a hell of a year, full of conflict and drama and legal proceedings. But it had also been a year of growth and community building and standing up for what was right. I'd made new friends, helped people in similar situations, and defended not just my property but the principle that people have the right to live their lives without petty tyrants dictating every detail. My phone rang as I was securing the last tie down on the shanty. It was Jennifer Harding. "Connor, thought you'd want to know. Patricia Vandermeer filed for bankruptcy last week. The restitution payments wiped her out financially. She's lost everything." I didn't feel the satisfaction I might have expected. Instead, I felt a kind of sad resignation. "That's rough." "It's consequences," Jennifer said. "She made choices, bad ones, and now she's paying for them. Don't waste sympathy on her, Connor. She wouldn't have wasted any on you if she'd won." She was right, of course. Patricia had been willing to harass, bully, and ultimately steal from me to get her way. She'd shown no remorse, no understanding that what she was doing was wrong. She'd believed that her position as HOA president gave her unlimited authority, that rules and laws didn't apply to her. She'd been wrong, and the justice system had proven it. As summer arrived in full force, bringing warm days and cool nights, I settled back into my routine. Fishing, maintaining my property, enjoying the peace and quiet of my little corner of Minnesota. The Lakeside Estates development hummed along under its new leadership, causing no trouble and being good neighbors. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'd sit on my dock and watch the sunset over Lake Minnewaska. The water would turn gold and pink and orange, reflecting the sky like a mirror. I'd think about my grandfather who'd built his life on this land and raised his family here. I'd think about the legacy he'd left me, not just the property but the values. Independence, self-reliance, standing firm in the face of pressure to conform or give in. I defended that legacy against Patricia Vandermeer's assault, and in doing so, I'd learned something important. Property rights matter. Not just the legal technicalities, though those are important, but the deeper principle. Your home, your land, your space, these are extensions of yourself. When someone tries to take them from you, or dictate how you can use them, they're trying to take away your autonomy, your freedom. That's worth fighting for. 1 year to the day after Patricia's first confrontation on the ice, Robert Chen organized a community gathering at the Lakeside Estates clubhouse. It was billed as a community renewal celebration, marking the changes that had taken place in the development. I was invited as a guest of honor, which felt strange but kind of nice. When I arrived, I found the clubhouse decorated with banners and balloons, tables laden with food, and dozens of smiling faces. Robert gave a speech about the importance of good governance and treating neighbors with respect. He talked about the mistakes the community had made under Patricia's leadership and the lessons they'd learned. He thanked me for standing my ground and inadvertently forcing the community to confront its problems. Connor Lancaster could have just given in, Robert said. He could have removed his shanty to avoid conflict, but he didn't. He stood up for his rights, and in doing so, he showed us what we'd become. We're grateful for that lesson, even though it was painful to learn. People applauded. I felt uncomfortable with the attention, but appreciated the sentiment. After the speech, I mingled with the residents, many of whom I now considered friends. We talked about fishing and weather and local politics, normal neighborly conversation without any undertone of conflict or suspicion. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, a teenage girl approached me shyly. "Mr. Lancaster, I'm Emma. I just wanted to say thank you." "Thank you for what?" I asked, puzzled. "For standing up to Mrs. Vandermeer. My parents were so stressed out when she was in charge. She fined us for everything. Our grass was too long, then it was too short. Our Christmas lights weren't the right color. It was constant. My mom cried a lot, but after everything that happened with you, things got better. My parents are happy again, so thank you." I didn't trust myself to speak for a moment. Finally, I managed, "You're welcome, Emma. I'm glad things are better for your family." She smiled and walked away, leaving me standing alone with unexpected emotion welling up. I'd thought of the whole situation in terms of property rights and legal principles, which were important. But I hadn't fully considered the human cost of Patricia's behavior on the people who lived under her rule. Families stressed out, people crying, constant anxiety about arbitrary rules and capricious enforcement. That was the real victory, I realized. Not the legal judgments or the criminal convictions, but the fact that an entire community had been freed from a tyrant's control. People could live their lives now without fear of harassment or unreasonable fines. Kids like Emma didn't have to watch their parents stress out over whether the mailbox was the exact regulation shade of black. As I drove home that night, the road winding through dark Minnesota forests, I felt a profound sense of peace. The battle was over. The war was won. Life could go on better and freer than before. The years that followed were quiet and good. Lakeside estates continued to thrive under reasonable leadership. I continued to fish and maintain my property and enjoy my life. Patricia Vandermeer remained in Duluth, working, as I heard, as a store clerk. She'd lost her house, her savings, her reputation. Whether she'd learned anything from the experience, I never knew. Sometimes people asked me if I felt bad about what happened to her. The honest answer was complicated. I didn't take pleasure in her downfall, but I didn't regret standing my ground either. She'd had every opportunity to stop, to back down, to act reasonably. She'd chosen escalation every time. The consequences were harsh, but they were consequences of her own actions, not mine. I rebuilt my relationship with my lake, fishing and swimming and skating depending on the season. The shanty that had caused so much trouble became a beloved landmark, featured in local tourism brochures as Minnesota's most controversial ice fishing shack. I got permission to add a small sign. Lancaster Family Fishing Shack ESD. 2023, rebuilt 2026. Tourists would sometimes stop by to take photos. I didn't mind. It was a good reminder that standing up for what's right, even in small things, can resonate with people. The story of one man refusing to be bullied by an overreaching HOA struck a chord with a lot of folks dealing with similar situations. Over time, I became something of an informal advisor to people dealing with HOA problems. I'd get emails and calls from across the country, people asking for advice or just wanting to vent about their situations. I helped where I could, offering legal contacts, strategic advice, and most importantly, encouragement to stand firm. The Minnesota legislature even passed a law, informally called Lancaster's Law, that put stricter limits on HOA authority and made it easier for residents to challenge abusive practices. I was invited to the Capitol for the signing ceremony, which was surreal but gratifying. Years later, sitting in my improved and expanded shanty on a cold January day, I reflected on how one incident, one Karen demanding I remove my property from my own land, had led to so much change. Patricia Vandermeer had intended to assert her authority and force compliance. Instead, she'd sparked a movement. Ice fishing that day was slow, but I didn't mind. Sometimes the point wasn't the catching, but the being there in the quiet with your thoughts and the ice and the possibility of fish below. My grandfather had taught me that. Patience, he'd said, was the most important skill an angler could have. Patience and the willingness to defend what's yours. I'd learned both lessons well. As the sun set over Lake Minnewaska, painting the ice in shades of gold and purple, I packed up my gear and prepared to head home. Tomorrow I'd be back, and the day after that, weather permitting. The shanty would stand through the winter, solid and sturdy, a testament to property rights and the refusal to be pushed around. Patricia Vandermeer had demanded I remove it. She'd thought her position gave her authority over me and my land. She'd been wrong, and that wrongness had cost her everything. I defended what was mine, stood my ground, and prevailed. The shanty remained, I remained, and life went on better than before. That was victory enough for anyone.